Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the Bollywood Cinema Club. I am the Culture Cast Chris Dashew, and I am joined on every episode of the Bollywood Cinema Club. We take a look at Indian cinema, past or present, and, well, we talk about it because as pretty much Westerners, it's not something a lot of us are familiar with. I'm a little bit more familiar than my two guests, but by the end of this episode, I think we might be having a different tune that we're all singing. I am joined by my good friend. He is the co-host of Movie Geeks United. He is their home entertainment correspondent, your friend and mine, Adam Long.
Hello, everybody.
And all the way from the East Coast as well. He is a radio host every Sunday, also author of Barney Miller and the Files of the Old One too. Your friend and mine, Otto Bruno.
Chris, Adam, nice to see you guys again.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's been a while. It's been a month since the three of us talked.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mentioned the name Satyajit Ray, and you, Chris, said who?
Yeah, boy, thanks for that, Otto.
And we do agree on the correct pronunciation this time around, I guess.
Yeah, Satyajit Ray. Yeah, we all know how to pronounce it now. So on this episode of the Bollywood Cinema Club, we are going to be taking a look at one of Satyajit Ray's more influential, famous, kind of important, critically acclaimed and acclaimed by the audience as well, 1964's drama Charulata. So the film is based on a book called Nasta. Oh God, I need to make sure I get this right. Nastanirth by Rabindranath Tagore, and it stars Sumatra Chatterjee, Mahabi Mukherjee, Salin Mukherjee, and Sayamal Ghoshal. And the film is all about the titular Charulata, a woman who, well, she's a rich woman who's bored, and her husband brings in his brother-in-law to, keep her occupied. And if you've seen movies before, you can probably picture where this goes. But likelihood is you've seen this movie because this is a pretty important Indian cinema film. And so is Satyajit Ray for that matter. But let's just cut right to the chase. Adam, I want to know your initial thoughts on 1964's Charulata.
Well, there are a lot of mysteries in the world. There's the Bermuda Triangle. There's the mysteries of Stonehenge and Nazca Peru lines. And among those mysteries would be this film and its high status in cinema, because I was not a fan of this film. It was I must admit, and I'm going to be honest, it was a torturous experience to get through this for me.
I was not expecting you to say that at all. I am floored, frankly.
Yeah, I'm in the minority on this, and but I cannot tell a lie. I cannot, and I will not tell a lie. I could sit here and I mean, there's some good aspects in the story. I get what he's trying to put across, but his style just does not appeal to me at all. And I knew we were in trouble 10 minutes in, because 10 minutes into this film, absolutely nothing of note had happened except for, we see one of the main characters just ambling about in the room where she's at. And it takes her 10 minutes to pick up a pair of binoculars and start looking out the window. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. And it didn't get any better. Yeah, it did not get any better from there. I mean, and there were scenes that were just interminable in this film that just went on and on and on. There was a whole sequence that's set in the garden where they're having a discussion about writing, and which I think is great stuff. Some of the dialogue is good, but it just goes on and on. And then there's a party later on that the husband has, and that again goes on and on and on. And it's like, I don't think maybe in other subsequent films he was a little more succinct in his storytelling, but with this film, I don't think he met a scene that he could shorten. I really don't. And it was just, and I think the pacing of the film just muted my experience. I couldn't get any of the good stuff that's in there, and there is some good stuff to be gleaned from the film. I'm not saying it's a terrible film and that it's not, that it doesn't have some important messages, but the style of the film was just it just really turned me off, and I just didn't, and I think I'm going to disappoint you guys on this one because I'm not going to have a lot of insight because I just don't feel like but I did make a few notes here, just very quickly. They say this is one of the director's favorite film. I think that a lot of his critics have said that his films are too slow and there are too many extended scenes. And there's, but the problem here for me was there were a lot of scenes without the tension or verve, or indeed much of anything happening at all, as I mentioned with the Amal and Charulata in the garden, and the Indian liberal intellectuals, as I previously mentioned. And I think also another problem with this film is that he tried to tackle too much, and in the process, he watered down or he left some unexplored key element. There's a subplot about the treacherous brother who absconds with newspaper funds, and this sibling conflict. It seems like it comes out of another movie. It comes out of nowhere. And it doesn't really gel with the story of the growing attraction between the cousin and the neglected wife. It just seems like it just doesn't even gel, and it takes the focus away from what should be the vital center of the film for me, which was the love story. Which and then there's the triple freeze ending at the end of the film, which is revered in cinema, as they say. And it features as its third leg a horrified servant. There's like three different characters who are freeze framed, and one of them is a servant. Well, that to me was nonsensical because we've seen him, I don't know what, maybe 2 minutes max in this film, and he's suddenly important enough to include in a freeze frame at the end of the film. And I'm just sitting here, slapping my head saying, what the hell? I mean, what's this all about, So anyway, I think the acting was good. The actors they played the parts with great relish. And I think they did a good job with what they had to work with. But his storytelling just did not jibe with me. And that's just a personal preference. That's not a reflection on the quality of this film. It's just a personal preference for me. It didn't jibe with me, and so that's my take on it. I'll not belabor the point, but that it just wasn't a good experience for me, and so there we go.
Adam's body was just rejecting the movie as he was watching. No, turn it off! Like George C. Scott in Hardcore. Turn it off! I get it. Yeah. I get it. I mean, I understand. I have seen movies where it's just like, this is just a slog. Like it's just a slog. So Otto, tell me a little bit about your take on Charulata.
What would you do with the show, Chris? Right now, I felt the exact same way.
I will. You gotta tell me, buddy. You gotta tell me. If you say you didn't like it, we'll still figure something out. Because I haven't. You guys don't know what I thought.
No,
that's right.
What's interesting is, I must preface this as being the unexperienced American. I'm not very proud to say this, but I had never seen an Indian film before. So this is the first Indian film that I have ever seen. And I think I've mentioned to you before, Chris, and I don't know if we mentioned it last time the three of us talked, but I do have a real problem with films that I think directors don't know how or refuse to edit, and that they just go on too long. I didn't have that experience with this, possibly because it was my first experience with an Indian film. It's, when you're watching a film like this for the first time, obviously I don't speak the language, so I'm reading the subtitles, and I'm trying to read the subtitles. I'm trying to take in what's happening, and I'm trying to also look at the photography, how something's being filmed. But it is interesting, though. I will say this. I, like Adam, was concerned in the first 10 minutes because there is almost no dialogue in the first 10 minutes. And for me, that is a warning signal because I'm a word-heavy person. I like dialogue in film. And of course, if you're a film person, you should really like visuals, but I love dialogue. so I was worried the first 10 minutes, but then after that, I certainly got into it. You did kind of see some of the things that were coming. Initially when they send for the cousin to or excuse me, he sends for his brother-in-law to keep his wife, who's the brother-in-law's sister, to keep her company and have her bring along his wife to do so. You assume that that's where the conflict's going to go, and then you're kind of surprised by the appearance of his cousin into the mix as well. But I mean, in those first 10 minutes, you are immediately told that this is a woman who is bored and unfulfilled. I mean, it's very obvious from the get-go. And then as time goes on, you also learn that she is very bright and very intelligent. And in fact, at one point, fairly early on, the cousin is talking to her and her sister-in-law, and the cousin says something about the traditional Indian woman and the new woman. And the sister-in-law is clearly the traditional wife, and Charulata, but they call her Charu, I think, in the film. She's clearly a new woman, but she's stuck in a traditional household. The whole thing with the glasses, the opera glasses, I found interesting. She is, I interpreted that as saying she's nothing but a spectator to life. She's not involved in it. In fact, I don't think we ever see her outside of the home, if I'm not mistaken. And it's funny, when you see that first scene of the husband where he walks past her 2 times and doesn't even look up. And I don't know how you guys felt, but initially I'm thinking, oh my God, is this guy one of these, kind of abusive, head of the household? He wants nothing more but for her to wait on him kind of situations. And it's really not. I mean, he's not a bad guy.
I don't think at all.
No, he's not. He's just so caught up in his love of what he's doing, his newspaper, and it's not just the newspaper. It's as we know now, it is the beginning of what will eventually, although it'll take decades, big changes in India and in his society that, you could argue from the little we learn about his newspaper, he's helping to usher in these changes. So yeah, he's not a bad guy. And of course, throughout it, he talks more than once about, the thing that's most important is truth. And then he talks about trust in a couple different times. And what's interesting later on, late in the film, for me, what I thought was quite poignant was the fact that the cousin Amal loves Sharu and she loves him, although it's never said by either of them. But the cousin also has such a love and admiration for his cousin that he's in pain both ways, because he would never betray him. So I thought, and in terms of the slow spots or the long, whatever it was, I mean, I think I said last time we talked that I had read before that Ray was considered to be like the Fellini of Indian cinema. So I was kind of prepared for this to be, a more intellectual, I guess, for lack of a better word, intellectual type of film. So I wasn't expecting, a roaring comedy or anything like that. I was expecting this to be somewhat existential. So I wasn't disappointed. But overall, yes, it is slow. It is quiet in many ways, but ultimately I found it to be very compelling. I will also agree with Adam, at least for this film. It sounds like he didn't like the freeze frame ending. I'm not big on freeze frame endings. I always think they're a little too artsy for me. Kind of like arts for the sake of art. But otherwise, I liked it. I thought it was a good film. I thought it was a solid film.
So I think I'm kind of in between. Adam, I 100% agree with almost everything you've said. It's a long movie. There's scenes that are very drawn out. It does feel, I'm not going to say like it's treading water, but it is just kind of going. I don't, not going without purpose, but because of how directionless it feels at times, because it can't decide, and not because it doesn't have a direction to go. I think that's not the case at all. And you've already mentioned it. Both of you have. It's not that it doesn't have a direction to go. It almost tries to do too much. And by doing too much, it feels completely directionless because there's the whole Bhupati owns a newspaper, but he is the one who can't get out of his own way to be around his wife because he's throwing himself into the newspaper. But like you mentioned, Otto, we know where the newspaper goes. We know what the newspaper ends up being a part of. It ends up being a part of a very important movement to get the Brits out of India. So obviously in 1964, they would have already known that. So, obviously, if you're an audience member watching this in 1964, you're cognizant of, okay, well, the newspaper, blah, 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 fine. Again, we're cognizant, the three of us, even as Westerners in 2022 about it. But I think because they try to have that, and then they try to have the Amal Sharu kind of love triangle, and then they also have her older brother? Is the one. So his brother, Bhupati's brother-in-law, is also trying to defraud them because he lives with them. I enjoyed it, but I think it does way too much to the point where the storyline that we're supposed to care about, Sharu and Amal, the main story, the love triangle between the three of them, between her, I guess, is it her cousin? I guess it's her cousin, right?
His cousin.
So it would be cousin, it would be her cousin-in-law, right?
And in fact, he says he calls her cousin-in-law more than once.
Right. So he and her, that should be the main focus. You can give the Bhupati story plenty of time on screen to kind of have an interesting counterpoint or show how much he cares about her, or how much he throws himself into his work, and how much progress he's making in spite of hindering his own marriage to his wife. But I just feel like they had 3-4 stories, and they should have done 2 of those. Do the Bhupati, Amal, Charulata love triangle, and do the Bhupati, the newspaper's important, it's going to change the world. I don't need the, your older brother is here defrauding us. Like that's given 2 scenes, literally like 2 scenes in the movie. To what end? To show that not everybody was on the same page, that people can be terrible. It's weird. That's not the story the movie is telling anywhere else. It's a pretty mature story. Even the way the love triangle kind of solves itself, or is solved, is a much more mature way of telling it than you would see from a lot of American cinema or cinema in general. Like, this is a rather mature way to handle a love triangle story. Is it completely well thought out? I don't think so. But I appreciate that it's not just, and then, he murders the brother or something. Because again, like, that was, my mind went all kinds of places when I read the synopsis. It's like, well, he brings his cousin-in-law in, and his cousin-in-law and his wife fall in love. Like, that could go anywhere. Where this goes it's interesting. It's not much. They could have done more with it, frankly. That's kind of what it just, in a lot of ways, I'm kind of with you, Adam. What drew Satyajit Ray to make this film is an interesting question, because like you mentioned, he kind of cites this as one of his favorite movie. There are plenty of critics that are like, this is an amazing and important film. And it's like, what am I missing? Or and maybe not even what am I missing, but what are you seeing that I'm not? Because I enjoyed it, but not some sort of grand revelation in cinema, and definitely not in Indian cinema. That's for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you're right on the mark. And it's funny, you mentioned, the Fellini, that was mentioned earlier, the similarities to Fellini, and I always had a little bit of a problem with Fellini too. I like the early black and white stuff, but when he goes to color, that stuff, just the charms of those films eluded me as well. So I know I'm in the minority on that. And anyway, I think there's a little element of the style of filmmaking Fellini had in his later years that's on display here. And that, like I said, it's just a personal preference. I think, as far as now, it's funny because Bergman films, Ingmar Bergman, they are slowly paced. A lot of them, there's not a lot of action there. And yet I a lot of those appeal to me. Not all of them. Some of them I'm not super crazy about, but there's a huge percentage of Bergman films that really do appeal to me. And it's a similar style, but this one, for some reason, its charms elude me, and it is what it is.
Well, I think at least for me, it kind of just goes to the core of the story, which is it's a rich woman who's bored.
Yeah.
Like the kind of important aspect of the story about her not feeling like she doesn't want to be part of society the way society is now. She wants to write and be a learned woman, which, like we've kind of already mentioned, there's this whole back and forth about, are you an original woman or a new woman? And it's like, a new woman doesn't know, how to make the food correctly, but the old woman does, or the old style of woman, but the new style of woman can write and do all these other things. And it's like, lean more on that, because that could be more interesting to mine. There are some interesting places to go there, but then that would require the brother in the husband's brother-in-law and her brother. That would require more of that story, which they barely do anything with on its own. So I just can't put my finger on what exactly outside of the main story all the other plot points were trying to get at.
Well, you two have put me in an untenable position, because I am going to really have to defend this film against you two.
I didn't dislike it. It's just it felt directionless, which maybe that's the point. And I'm just complaining, like you said, Adam. Maybe we're just subjectively have a problem with it. I know objectively that this is a great film. I know you do as well, Adam. You watch more new stuff than I do. So, I know I know the three of us know how to separate the two, but like, it's an objectively good movie. I just think it's not, I don't really care about a rich woman's plight the way they tell this story, because she just seems kind of bored.
Well, I think maybe that's why the film is slowly paced. Maybe he's trying to put us in the headspace of the boring woman. And
Fine.
like, I'm going to bore the audience to tears, and that way they'll know what this woman's life is like. So maybe he was playing a sly trick on us, and we didn't even know about it. So,
all right, now wait a minute. Now, so, Chris, have you seen any Bergman films?
A long time ago.
Okay, because yes, me too. It's been a while since I've seen, but I saw at one point, because I took a class on Fellini and Bergman. So I saw about 8 or 10 Bergman films, and there were some Bergman films that I really liked. I thought were quite good. And then there were many Bergman films that I watched that I literally would have rather sat in a room and watched paint dry. Okay, because it would have been the same thing, but at least I would have gotten a high off the smell.
I would agree. There's some in there. Cries and Whispers is a film that's highly revered that I've tried to watch that 3 times, and I've yet to get on its wavelength. And but now I'll say Autumn Sonata is a phenomenal film, I think, because it's and I have some personal experience in this matter with my own father. The mother in the film is very much like my father was, and so I identified with that personally. So Autumn Sonata is one of my favorites, and there are a few others. Ironically, I think the one that he made that was an English language film with Elliot Gould, The Touch, is one of his better films. I know Quentin Tarantino really likes that one.
Wow. No, here's the thing, because you Adam, you mentioned the later Fellini films, and I actually tend to agree with you on that. I have trouble getting through some of the later Fellini films that some people consider masterpieces, like Giulietta of the Spirits. That's a tough one for me. And nowadays, I mean, you guys have both said that this was a long film. This was an hour and 57 minutes. Nowadays, that's a short film compared to some of these films that they put out now that are 2.5 hours or more. That drives me nuts.
Well, Otto. Well, Otto, let me tell you, a lot of contemporary Indian cinema is that long, but the thing is, it holds your attention the entire time. Again, like this in my mind is indicative of the expectation one might have when I say to you Indian cinema. It's this high quality, in some ways erudite filmmaking style, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it is not for everyone. And I'm not saying that for the three of us, because you don't just happen upon this movie. Somebody doesn't just put this on for you and say, hey, take a look at this movie from 64. You have to go out of your way to find this movie. So we knew what we were getting into. Again, it's a very well-regarded film.
Oh, yes.
Academically well regarded. It's Criterion. There's a really, 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 really good essay that you can find on the Criterion website called Charulata, Calm Without, Fire Within by Philip Kemp. He wrote it when they reissued the film in 2013. And he talks about why this film is kind of so important and who loved it. And Jean-Luc Godard apparently really loved this. It's one of Godard's favorite films. I know it's just,
now you're having me question myself because I never cared for Godard, but
I'm there with you. I tried Breathless a couple of years ago. I got that as a Christmas present about 4 or 5 years ago. I barely could get through it, and I know it was it's a hugely influential film. And again, I wondered what I was missing, but I was mostly bored by it, to be quite honest.
From what I remember, Breathless was one of Godard's more watchable films.
Right, it is. I've tried some of the others, and they're even less engaging. And I have to agree with Quentin Tarantino. He always talks about the Jim McBride remake of Breathless being better than the 1959 version, and I kind of am right there with him. And that is sacrilege to say that to a lot of people, but I have to, because it's more interesting to me. So
I have to say, Chris, I actually have I have less of a problem with Adam's take on this film, because it's quite clear that Adam totally did not like this film. You keep saying, like for example, the one thing I'm confused about is you saying it was hard to follow because there were so many different stories. I didn't really feel that way.
I didn't feel like it was hard to follow. I felt it felt direct. It felt like it didn't know which direction to go in as a movie because it split itself too far across the board. I would have preferred more of Madhmabi Mukherjee and Sumitra Chatterjee together, just them spending time together. I liked that. I get why we don't get more of it, but at the same time, it's like Adam already mentioned, it's the emotional core of the movie. I could watch the two of them on screen for an hour or two, just the two of them. They have a lot of chemistry together. Sumitra Chatterjee is a very charismatic actor without having to do much, which I really appreciate. A very just naturalistic way of being charismatic. He's not trying to be charismatic. He just is, which comes across the way she receives him, because he doesn't seem disinterested in her, but he never says, I love you to her. He's not effusive with his love towards his cousin-in-law. He's just, he's astounded by her ability to write. He's astounded by her ability to kind of be on his level, at least academically, he believes. She's probably much more gifted than he is in reality. But I like all of that. It's just, I'm actually going to just say I could have used another 30 minutes. I had no problem with how long this movie is. I wish they had given more of the things that worked and less of the stuff like Bhupati at the newspaper just talking about how he's going to help with Indian independence. Like, I don't need that scene. I know that that's what's going on here.
But I don't feel like that was overdone. I feel like it's the point is that it's showing. It's just there to kind of present to you why he's maybe not giving the attention that he should be giving to this woman. And yet at the same time, he's not totally ignorant of her. For example, he's aware that she can write because he tells his cousin, I'd like you to encourage her to write more, but if I say that to her, she won't do it. And so he is, he's aware of her talents and abilities. He's aware that she is, even though she certainly is fulfilling the requirements of a traditional Indian woman, he's also seems to me to be pretty aware that she is also a new Indian woman. And at the end there, before he before he accidentally discovers that she's in love with his cousin. But right before that, she makes the proposal that he start the paper again, and that she'll handle all the Bengal stuff and he can handle just the English political stuff. And he thinks that's a great idea. So that means he's willing to share this baby of his, this newspaper that he held, we could argue he held more dear than anything. And he's willing to share it with his wife in late 19th century India. So that's huge. I just think, I do think the relationship between Amal and Shahroo is obviously the emotional center of the film, okay. But I think that it's it's not just the love story. It's also the issues about fidelity and trust and honesty and the other character which we haven't discussed. You're right. The brother-in-law, that character is not in any way drawn out. I will agree with that part of it. That's like a very flat, one-dimensional character. The sister-in-law is somewhat interesting because she is more the traditional Indian woman. And it seems to me, particularly at the end when she's getting ready to leave, it seems to me that she also, in her own way, loves Amal. Not quite as intensely and not quite in the same way as Shahroo, but she does as well. And of course, she has nothing in her arsenal like Shahroo does in terms of her writing ability and her ability to talk to him and share his interests on the same intellectual level. So I thought her character was kind of interesting and what that represented for that period of time. I don't know. Maybe if I watched it again, I'd be bored by it. But certainly on this first viewing, again, it's literally the only Ray film I've ever seen and the only Indian film I've ever seen. So I can't judge it against his other works. But I guess I'm the guy who liked it the most.
It's nothing wrong with that. I'm telling you, it's the first Ray film I've ever seen and the first Indian film I've seen as well. So I'm right there with you. And I'm not going to let that hold me back, though. I promise. I'm going to, be open-minded and for future works from this director and from Indian cinema in general, because I should be more knowledgeable about it. I'm aware of it. I'm a little embarrassed that I haven't investigated a little bit more, but it's just sometimes, I appreciate the social context that they're trying to work into the film here. There's some important social issues that are being investigated in this film. Let's not not make light of that. I may be by some of the statements that I said, and I don't want to. I don't want to be misconstrued, because I think that the social elements of this film are very important issues to discuss about women being respected and treated equally instead of being treated as a second-class citizen in the home, and with the man having all the say-so and all that type stuff. That's there's a lot of that that's explored in this film, and so that stuff is important. It is stuff that's worth noting. It's just the style, Ray's style in this particular film was just it muted a lot of that of my enjoyment for the film, and so. But I'm not going to give short shrift to the things that are being explored here, because there are some important there's some meat here, I guess is a good way to put it, that we should I want to make sure that is noted.
Well, and I think to your point, I would think that in a lot of ways, that's kind of the big takeaway here is what the overarching message is, and kind of what Ray is driving at with, setting it in higher, upper class society. And, how does upper class society deal with, the woman's place in the household at the time, or what does that mean at the time, and how could you be progressive at the time? Because again, what we're seeing here is, pretty progressive female character, a pretty progressive male husband character. Again, we're not having Bhupati go, no, and hitting the pen out of her hand and saying, you can't do this. He, like you mentioned, Otto and Adam, he is fostering that. He is wanting that to grow. She is the one who says, I don't want to write. I don't want to do these things for fear of, I guess, rejection, for it not being as good. And I appreciate the message of the film that, you know, even sometimes you don't believe in yourself, the belief may come from the position you least expect it. Because at the time, this is very atypical. The woman's place was in the house. That's still the way it is now in plenty of places around the world that aren't progressive. It's not, oh, everything's fine now. That's not the case. Very much so. Go watch any amount of topical news coverage from most countries that have issues with this kind of stuff, still having issues. India still has issues. This country, we still have issues. But I appreciate that in the context of this film, we're seeing progressive characters written smartly and progressively. And I can commend Ray for that, because that was not what I was expecting at all. I was not expecting, again, even the cousin-in-law is pretty progressive. He doesn't just blow up their marriage for his own selfish needs. He is an adult about it. He understands, you know, his entire conflict is, should I be with her or should I go off and live what sounds like a pretty awesome life? In every account, you know, go marry a woman whose family is rich. They're going to move to England. You're going to be able to walk the streets of England and do whatever you want, essentially. And that's what he does.
Well, but remember that his cousin was telling him that they would send him to law school to be a barrister.
Right.
And he doesn't want to be a barrister because the cousin is talking about how exciting it would be to be in the English courtroom and hear all the legal debates and all this, while the cousin is listening to him, and all he's dreaming about is the romanticism of the travel.
Right.
Basically, being able to go anywhere other than the India that he's seen so far in his young life.
Yeah, he wants to walk the rain-soaked streets of the UK. I mean, that's what it is. It's like you said, it's this romanticized idea. Again, we don't know if it ever actually comes to fruition. He just leaves at the end. But it again, I do like that they keep kind of reinforcing, even if everybody is kind of on the same page, not everybody's on the same line. Because again, like you've mentioned, the brother or the husband is, you know, he's so motivated by one singular idea. And so he, even when he's talking to his cousin-in-law or his cousin or anybody else, he can't get out of his own way, which I'm sure we all know people like that. So again, I appreciate the realism with which the film is presenting itself. It is presenting, I think, for the most part, really well thought out characters. Even if they're a little one note, they don't feel when they're talking one dimensional. Does that make sense? They have like one defining characteristic and that's it. But Ray does a good job of kind of expounding upon that one idea.
Well, the other thing I thought was interesting that you just mentioned a moment ago too is why she kind of holds back from pursuing the writing, and you know, is it because she's just lacking in confidence? I actually originally read it a different way, and that was the husband is kind of telling her, oh, you should write, and then he says to the cousin, she won't do it if I tell her. And then even when the cousin does it, like basically the writing aspect of it doesn't seem as important to her. She just wants these guys' attention. She wants some love from somebody. And you know, I think that's the thing with the husband, because remember, at one point the husband is talking with his cousin, and I think it's when the cousin gets published, and at first his cousin is, you know, the husband is impressed because he thinks he's gotten published for having written some kind of article, like journalistic article. And then when he discovers it's, you know, more literature type stuff, he's just not interested, because he's not interested in that stuff. And that's why I feel too, like when she writes and Amal is so impressed by her writing, and he's like stunned by how good her writing is. And then she says, I'm never going to write anything again, because he's still more interested and amazed and paying attention to what she's written. He just wants someone to pay attention to her, and she wants some romance, some love, some some personal attention. I mean, that's how I read it. I mean, or how I perceived it, and I could be wrong, but that's the magic of movies, I guess. We all interpret it as we want. But and by the way, I did think, and this goes back to something Adam said at the beginning, I was struck near the end of the movie in a couple different scenes, because it is such a quiet and slow-paced, slow-moving film, that when she does show emotion, she really got to me. Like, she really sold it to me, because she had been holding back so much for so long, that I thought when she did get emotional, it really made an impact.
Well, yeah, her show of emotion at the end of the film is one of the more powerful moments in the film. I will give you that. That certainly does. That is a very powerful scene. Like I said, there was just too much before that kind of muted everything. I keep saying muted. That's the key word here, I think, but it's true. It's true.
Well, it's one of those movies that this is an elevated piece of cinema. It just is. I mean, there's no two ways around it. We talked Bergman, we've talked Fellini, we've talked Godard. Like, those names, you're not mentioning those names, and you're not watching a Godard film and then sitting down and watching a J.J. Abrams movie in the same breath. You can go and sit and watch those movies in the same day, but you're not watching one in response to the other. This is, that's not the expectation with Godard. These are important films that are meant to be studied and watched over and over again, and used to interpret the rest of his oeuvre through those films. Similar to this film, I would wager a guess, if we sat down and watched another Satyajit Ray film, we would go, well, here's what we've seen X, Y, and Z from this one, and A, B, and C in this one, and here's how X is B in this one, and Y is A in that one, that kind of thing. That would be my interpretation of this, having not seen any other Satyajit Ray films, primarily now, because I'm not going to just watch them without having an opportunity to talk about them, because this movie's important. We know that. But the Apu trilogy, I'm curious now, what is that? Because it's pretty well regarded, talked about rather glowingly anytime I've read anything about it. It too is a Criterion Collection film. Again, we talked a little bit when the three of us talked about Harry and Tonto about the Criterion Collection and kind of all of the kind of the weird things going on with Criterion, but this movie makes sense that it's a Criterion movie, 100%. It totally fits within that world of elevated cinema that's important, that's trying to say something or trying to do something or have something to say about the culture at the time.
What are the films? What are the titles of the films that are in that Apu trilogy? Do you know?
It's Pather Panchali, Apradito, and The World of Apu, which all came out before these, almost a decade before this movie comes out.
Yeah, mid to late 50s, I think. Yeah. If you wanted to do the definitive Criterion double feature, you should do Armageddon and this film. That would be the
Armageddon, The Rock, and Charulata.
There you go.
The I'm Totally Confused trilogy.
Yeah. And maybe throw in Pink Flamingos while you're at it.
Right. The I'm Confused trilogy, along with a shit-eating film, Just 'Cause. So it's, sure. The other thing that's interesting about this movie, we've kind of mentioned some of the more kind of social aspects to it, is when this movie comes out in 1964, Cannes rejects it, which makes Bergman very angry. Bergman is one of the people who is protesting this movie not being involved in Cannes. But if you go and look at the response at the time, all very positive. Look at the response now. There's people talking about, it's slow, but the opulence that it portrays within the film, the kind of extravagance of the place that they live, counterpointed against the kind of humdrummedy of their life. I mean, they live in opulence, but their lives are so boring. Like, it's that contrast, right? And we see it in other kind of more contemporary things, but it's done better here because I kind of mentioned it a little bit already. In a lot of these stories, Charulata would be a wholly unlikable character in a lot of ways. And she's not here. I appreciate that kind of, it wouldn't be subversive, but I appreciate that this story is walking a very fine line, because by the end of this movie, I don't feel, oh, well, Charulata is trying to be with his cousin-in-law, but she's a terrible person. It's like, there's none of that. It's resolved in a very realistic way. I feel like a very plausible way. I mean, realistic, plausible. I don't know. What am I off track here? Otto's making faces at me.
Well, no, but only because I'm interested in that you read, like, did I miss something? I didn't read them. I didn't see it as them living in opulence. I mean,
it's a pretty nice, it's a very nice house, isn't it? Or am I crazy?
Yeah, but I mean, it's not. It's a big place, but I mean, his business is in the bottom half. The brother-in-law, steals whatever money he steals, and the whole thing goes under. I mean, if he had that much wealth, it wouldn't have all been locked in a little safe in his place. I didn't see like a lot of tons of expensive furnishings or things like that. I don't know. I didn't read it in that.
I don't know. His wife is allowed to sit in the house all day and not do anything.
Allowed or required?
That's the question.
The movie never makes that. The movie never takes a stand. I don't know.
I got the feeling that that's what was expected of a woman in late 19th century India.
But again, they do have a woman in the house, even though it is her brother's wife. They're acting like they're housekeepers is what it feels like. Or am I, or again, maybe I'm misinterpreting this movie entirely incorrect.
Maybe it's semantics too. When you say opulence, I just think of,
right. I'm thinking of opulence of the time, I have seen plenty of movies set in period India that are not this. And then I watch this movie and they're living in a very nice house. It has a courtyard. Let me put it this way. If you had this house in India right now, you would be considered middle upper class still now. You know what I mean? Like, maybe it's not opulence, but it's a bigger and nicer house than I live in. That's for sure. And again, his money does get stolen, but I think the amount of money that he takes is a lot of money. I think that was my interpretation, was he steals a shitload of money and absconds with it. Because again, by the end of the movie, they still have the house. They're still living in the house. Right, and they restart the newspaper. So maybe it's not all.
He had to go to the other guy to get the funding to start the newspaper.
That's fair. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Maybe that's my read up. But again, the character that she is and the way she's written is so atypical for this kind of movie. There's not a malicious bone in her body. She's given a fair amount of autonomy as well. Yeah, she gets upset at the end about Amal, but you get the sense she'll be fine. It's not a devastation to her life and now she can't move on. And that, again, I appreciate that the filmmaker is mature enough to not give the characters what they want, in a way, to withhold that from the characters and see what comes of that, as opposed to just, oh, well, she's with him now and the husband's newspaper fails and he, runs off and lives on his own on the street or something.
But certainly you didn't see it as a happy ending.
No, God, no.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, what is this movie's happy ending?
Well, and of course, see, now I would say, the realist that I am, that's the reality of this depiction, is that what is the happy ending? Well, are there really any truly happy endings? I mean, the happy ending for her, and maybe for Amal too, would have been for them to go off together, but it's not a happy ending, because then they're both hurting someone that they care about. Plus, it's destroying the guy that they care about. So it's not him. But I don't know if I'd go so far as to say she'll be like, she's certainly affected by his leaving.
Sure. And for sure.
Not only that, but now Bhupati has discovered and she didn't. And keep in mind the way he discovers not because she tells him, but because he observes her lamenting Amal's leaving. So now she's hurt Bhupati, who she didn't intend to hurt, and she's hurt Amal. I mean, she'll have a lot to overcome, I think, emotionally.
Sure.
By the way, the big lesson that this taught me is never talk to yourself out loud, and never assume you're alone. Because you don't know who's in the house with you. So don't be talking and saying terrible things out loud, because you never know who's listening.
Good advice. There's always a lesson to be learned. Yeah.
I think though, I mean, I didn't want it to come off as kind of dismissive, she'll be okay. But I think to your point, it's life is not as easily kind of written down, right? Like there have been plenty of, in our own lives, happy endings and not happy endings, however you want to interpret it. I mean, there's no ending until it's absolutely definitively over. So any day can end on a high note or on a low note. The day that they have ends on a rather low note, but the ending, I didn't interpret it as completely negative. I interpreted it as he finds out, but he's extending his hand in kind of a, again, my interpretation is he's extending his hand to her because he wants to do better. And by her hand meeting his in the freeze frame, they want to try to maybe do better together. Do they succeed? Is it all roses? Probably not. Are they together by the end of it? Who knows? But I think it's a realistic ending. It's a hopeful ending, but it's not and everything worked out in the end. And I don't need that. And the narrative would not be suited by such a hard stance being taken, given that the movie kind of doesn't take a stance throughout on a lot of other things. And now it's a happy ending. Like that wouldn't jibe with me with the rest of the movie.
Adam, I'm going to guess you've seen more stuff. Certainly you've seen more recent stuff than I have. But who else uses this freeze frame a lot? I don't like it.
Well, Scorsese obviously used it quite a bit, especially in Goodfellas and Casino. So that's a technique that he has used more than once, shall we say. But I think he uses it to good effect in terms of the where he chooses to use it. I think it works in tandem with the film projects that he does use it in. And I think let's see, Alexander Payne has used it obviously with the Election. He used it to good effect in his 1999 film Election quite a bit. And those are two examples that come to mind from the last 25 years or whatever, or 30 years, I should say, 32 years since Goodfellas. So yeah, and there are others, but those are just a few that come to mind. But freeze frames are effective if you're using it for the right material. It depends on the material, but sometimes it can be less effective, shall we say, in terms of it depends on what you choose, where you choose to use it, and how. So it should be something that should be applied liberally, shall we say, or conservatively, I should say, not liberally.
Yeah. Some directors really use it pretty liberally.
That's what I was trying to say. It's too liberally used, but should be applied conservatively. Let me correct that. Amend that statement.
I think Ray uses it rather well. I mean, again, where he uses it, I think works. I think it does kind of verge on being a little much. I will, what's funny is I did read a fair amount about the first 10 minutes of the movie, as I'm sure we all did, and how kind of effusive everybody is with the praise about the first 10 minutes of the movie. I get it, but I don't need to see it again. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I appreciate it. Thank you. It was great. You've set the tone, you've set the mood, and you've kind of set the expectations that I should have for the character of Charu, but it is a little much. I mean, but that's the intention of the filmmaker, is I think for us to feel like the existence that Charu has is not for her in the way that she wants it to be. Like you mentioned with the opera glasses, Otto, kind of a viewer in your own life, or, looking from in the glass cage looking out. You don't need to do it for 10 minutes.
That was interminable for me, I must admit. And that just really put me in a bad frame of mind, I should say. So Didn't help.
Here's another interesting question, though. How much, like, I wonder how differently audiences might have viewed that in 1964 as opposed to us viewing it now in 2022. Now that we've gone through, all of us have had a lifetime of 15, 30-second commercials, MTV, movies and TV shows now where no shot is lingered upon for more than 3 or 4 seconds. So I wonder how that affects our read of it. You know what I mean?
Well, I liked what the hell's that movie called? The one with Daniel Day-Lewis. There Will Be Blood. That movie doesn't have dialogue for the first half an hour.
Yeah, that's true. But that film, to me, there's something going on. It's a busy, busy quiet. It's quiet, but
that's the problem.
That's the difference between this film. Nothing, absolutely nothing of note. And I think of certain directors who wouldn't have been caught dead having 10 minutes go by with nothing happening. I'm thinking Alfred Hitchcock. There's no way Alfred Hitchcock, who was at the peak of his powers when he was kind of on the way down, actually, when this film was made. But, he had been in the years prior to this at the peak of his powers. And you would have never caught him with a film where there's 10 minutes of just somebody rambling around with a pair of opera glasses, or Billy Wilder. So, there were a lot of directors who, their styles were, they weren't gonna do that sort of thing. And but I think it was more of your foreign film directors that had a more subdued approach. Maybe, I don't know. I think that's just an American film style that I think has been prevalent for most of the history of film. I think, in my opinion. But what do I know?
Well, I was going to say, I'm certainly no expert on foreign films. I mean, I like the ones I've seen, but I do think what you're saying, and I tend to agree. I think certainly the foreign films that I have seen by the directors that I have seen, like Fellini and Bergman and Renoir and people like that, Kurosawa, I think generally speaking, those giants of foreign cinema are quite often more focused on metaphysical questions.
Yeah.
And, very angst-ridden ruminations about, the meaning of life and relationships and all of those things. And yes, and American films have always been, and I like this about it, have always been more about storytelling, I think, which is a little different.
That's true. Yeah. Eric Romer is a good example of somebody who doesn't have a lot of action in his films. And I've seen quite a few of his films. But his films, to me, are never boring. There's not a lot of action going on. They're very dialogue driven. But I love the majority of his work. So, if there's interesting conversations to be had, then that can be as interesting as having nonstop action to me. If you have characters, but she's in complete silence in the first of this film. There's no conversation. There's nothing but her just walking around, and so that it's a different it's a different type of thing. So
it's muted, like you said. It really is. Yeah.
But isn't it possible that not possible. I'm assuming he did that on purpose to try to make us feel as comfortable and as uncomfortable, excuse me, and as stilted and stifled as she is.
Yeah. As I said earlier, he was trying to get in a very subtle way. Hey, she's boring, and I'm going to make you bored as well.
I'm going to show you how she feels, how boring her life is.
So let's all get bored together. How about it?
And again, if that's the intention, because if we ask ourselves, what's the intention? Is it successful? Yeah.
If he's trying to bore us, then he succeeded quite well, swimmingly well, I would say.
Yeah.
Misery loves company.
That's right. There we go.
But I think for me, it is just, it's too much of a vague rumination on these things. And it's not, like you've mentioned, Adam, a lot of the time, or I guess Otto, or I guess you both have, a lot of the times when it's a movie like this, the director is really they're going for it with whatever they're trying to say. And this is just, not that this isn't going for it, but it is a very different way of going for it. A very, like you mentioned, Adam, muted, subdued, very laid back way of going for it, which is fine. Just for me, sitting with a character for 10 minutes and then the character, in a lot of ways, she is the main character in this movie, obviously, but in a lot of ways, she's just kind of there a lot of the times. She's just kind of in the scene, which, again, that's a point, obviously. Sanjit Ray is making a point by her in a lot of the scenes just being there. There's a scene where Amal is on the ground writing in the journal that she gave him, and she's just swinging on the swing, which you want to talk about a scene that gave me motion sickness. Holy cow. He stays with her on that swing for quite some time.
Yeah. Break out the Dramamine.
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, it was a lot, but at the same time, those shots are the moments in the movie where I feel like Ray is really trying to don't you get it? Like, don't you get it? And like, I appreciate it, but for me, this is not the way I would have gone about it. This is not the way that interests or excites me as a film goer, which is fine. Subjectivity and objectivity are important to have conversations about when it comes to criticism. It just is.
It's the same sort of criticism that was thrown against Michael Cimino when he did Heaven's Gate. It's the same sort of thing to me. I see them as different, opposite sides of the same coin. I mean, because there's these long, it's a beautifully shot stuff, but it just goes on forever, and yet people were so critical of Michael Cimino and his transgressions on a film like that. But this film is in the same ballpark, and yet he gets a pass. I don't get it. I mean, it's just, I don't understand that. But anyway, again, what do I know?
Well, and I'm with you in a lot of ways. I mean, look, the book is written by Rabindranath Tagore, and I believe they've said more recently it may have been based off of his own life, which is kind of fucked up because in reality, the Charu character in real life killed herself.
Oh.
So
that is pretty bad.
Yeah.
Can't get much worse than that.
No. So it's interesting. Some of this may be Rabindranath kind of atoning for what he believes his part in all of it was. Again, this is just supposition. This is recent supposition that it may be based on his life and things that happened to him with his own, I guess, sister-in-law and brother. So because he may have been the one that the sister-in-law fell in love with because his brother is older than him, the sister-in-law of his brother. So maybe that's what it is. It's a little bit of reality being made fictional, but for me, there are better ways to tell this story that don't feel so meandering. I can appreciate it for what it is. We've all seen it now. I like what Ray is going for. I'd be interested to watch more. This may not be something I ever return to, unfortunately, frankly.
What's the name of that book again? Because I thought it said it was based on a story called The Broken Nest or something.
Nasantrin is the name of the book by Rabindranath Tagore. Yep. The Broken Nest. Right. Which honestly would be a great name for this movie.
Great title, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic title.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting movie. And it's, again, as the first time I'm seeing a Sanjit Ray film, I'm not sure how motivated I am to watch another one right now, at least.
Well, now that you've mentioned it, I'll have to try to watch, I'll have to see if they have all three of that trilogy on Criterion. It looks like they have at least two of them. So I would assume if they have two of them, they would have the third one on there, but never assume. So
right. Not with Criterion.
Yeah. But I'm also with you, Adam, too. I like dialogue. So that's the other reason why I assumed I would be, the odd man out on this one. But I know I like dialogue. That's why I love Renoir's films, Grand Illusion and Rules of the Game. And so, I mean, very Rules of the Game, especially, very dialogue driven. But it's it's fascinating. And it's just, but that might not be the kind of filmmaker that Ray was. I mean, he might have, like we said, we're all none of us really know because this is apparently the first Ray film for all of us. Chris, you've seen other Indian films, but you were just talking about, what was the one you were talking about before we went on the air? It sounded like more of an action
Oh,
film.
Triple R. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is a big budget action
Right.
with plenty of CGI and all kinds of practical. It's insane. And again, Indian cinema, ostensibly Indian cinema, could show it to you and show you this movie and show you that movie and say, both Indian cinema, you can't draw a line. You can draw a line, but you like the line is going to be very convoluted and all over the place. But you can get there. But I mean, it would be like talking about movies from the 40s and drawing a line to Marvel movies. It's there. It's not going to be a direct line. It might take a detour or a U-turn somewhere. But that's the thing. I mean, this is an important movie, whatever that means, right? Like that's the problem. It is a lot of there are plenty of movies like this, and a lot of them are Criterion movies where it's important. Its entertainment value may or may not exist, but it's an important movie. That
I think you said earlier too about the idea of subjectivity, because if you want to bore the hell out of me and maybe dissuade me from watching a movie, tell me it has a lot of CGI in it, and I will avoid it like the plague.
Yes, I'm right there with you.
Agreed. Agreed. But at the same time, if you're showing me something interesting with that CGI that I've never seen before, then I'm on board. It's if you're just doing the same third act thing over and over and over again, which we see so many Marvel doing, then it is just the same thing. I mean, that's the thing. It's CGI through the lens of Indian cinema, not through Western cinema.
Right.
You see what I mean? So inherently, it's already more interesting than just, whatever Iron Man 4, 5, 6, 7 or Captain America 5 and 6. It's how are we using that technology and how do they use it? Which is, I mean, again, this is a drama love story told in a way that an Indian filmmaker would make it, not the way an American filmmaker would make it at the time.
Right.
So that's why I appreciate this movie. But I think I am with you, Adam. Was not the biggest fan. Just wasn't. This was not for me, clearly. This did not resonate with me the way a lot of other Indian cinema films have. This is like the first time, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, don't let me sway you one way or the other.
No, I think it's, I mean, again, even though subjectively I wasn't the biggest fan, I think like yourself, Adam, you'd probably agree objectively, obviously, it is a movie that is worth a deeper discussion than just, what, did you like it? Yes or no. Like there's more to it, obviously.
Oh yeah. A lot of gray areas there. A lot of gray areas.
So, Otto, final thoughts on Charulata?
Final thoughts is I was almost afraid, somewhat intimidated to watch this because it was my first Indian film ever. I was kind of insecure. I thought I might be the only one who wouldn't like it. This is before I saw it at all. And I agree, like I said at the top of the program, I agreed with Adam. The first 10 minutes had me concerned, but after that, it did draw me in. And it will, I certainly hope it will, make me want to seek out more Ray films and more other Indian films. Because, it's a totally untapped area for me of films that I've never, ever seen. So, again, did I think it was the greatest film I ever saw? No, but I liked it, and I let's say this: I appreciated it.
What about you, Adam?
Well, like I said, there are some important social issues discussed in the film. I think it's for anybody who's a serious scholar of foreign cinema, this is a landmark film, and it's talked about. I mean, you can't underestimate its importance. So for that, if you're serious about film history, and if you're going to talk about films, you should be serious about it. It's worth investigating just to have some exposure to it, so that you can know what it's all about. And like I said, go into it knowing that it's slowly paced and that it's going to take its time, and there are some subplots that really don't belong there. But at its core, there are some good. There's some good social things that are social cues and not cues, but social subjects that are discussed. Let's just say that. So
And I agree with both of you. I think, it's a movie that obviously strikes upon a lot of issues that, in the late, 1897 and on, that's, something that is still important now in a lot of ways to cultures around the world, but it's got an interesting message. It's got an important message. And yeah, was it for me? No. Can I appreciate how important it is to Ray's filmography, to what he would, was working on, would continue to work on? Yeah, I can kind of see and kind of assume maybe, and we know what we say about assuming, but what I would be getting into should anyone watch another Ray film. All of that out of the way, I will echo exactly what you said, Otto. I can appreciate this movie. It is just didn't resonate with me the way a lot of other films have. And that's okay. Not everything has to, not everything's going to. I think for the most part, like 90% of the movies I watch are I'm kind of interested in or leave some sort of impact. That 10% is kind of always the issue, but the 10% is a rather small group of movies. It's a large group of movies, but it is a smaller group of movies than the other 90%. So sometimes it's just a movie with something to say, and I'm not necessarily super in tune or listening with my entire brain. It's not something that's going to be a return watch, but it was something I'm glad I watched the first time. So on that note, Adam, where could people find you on the internet should they be looking?
Good question. Well, that would be moviegeeksunited.com. And all the places where you get your podcasts. We put up a Blu-ray 4K episode every month where we cover all the physical movie releases. We do that. We tape those at the end of the month, and so we can cover everything that's been released, because we don't want to do it at the beginning of the month. So because some of these titles get shifted, for different reasons. So we want to make sure it's actually out there before we talk about it. And you can find those shows at all the places where you get your podcasts. And I do a weekly column, rounding up both theatrical and physical releases at focusnewspaper.com. That's published every Thursday. And so those are a few places that you will find my work.
What about you, Otto?
Well, I can be found wandering around a giant Indian house doing needlepoint, trying to find myself and my place in the world.
Otto understands the Charulata lifestyle. Apparently, he really resonated with this movie because he lives in a giant house, and he's just...
Actually, I live in a very small house. No, they can. Let's see. I do a weekly radio show on Jazz 90.1 in Rochester, New York. They can find it at www.jazz901.org. And they can find me, Chris, in the pages of Barney Miller and the Files of the Old One, too. My first book that as you well know, I poured my heart and soul into. So
literally every page has a drop of Otto's blood.
That's what they printed it with.
Yeah. Right. All right. We need a couple ounces. We're going to mix it into all of the ink for your book. That would be weird, but hey, I appreciate your commitment to the craft, as they would say. As for me, BollywoodCinemaClub.com is where you can find this show. WeirdingWayMedia.com is where you can find all the other shows that I work on, including the Culture Cast, where this show came from, because that's where we were doing Indian cinema before we spun it off into its own show. You can find this show on any podcatchers that you use, iTunes, Spotify. We're there. Give us a rating and a review. It helps us out, helps people find the show. And yeah, as for the three of us, Otto, Adam, thank you so much for joining me. Next time, if we do another one of these, let's do something that's just completely 180. Total 180 even.
Well, I appreciate you getting me to watch any Indian cinema. I'm very happy that I have now seen an Indian film and will hopefully see more. So
I'm right there with you. I appreciate the invite, and I probably wouldn't have done this on my own accord. So I'm glad I did. I'm glad I had that experience.
And yeah, we'll make sure to catch you on the next episode.